Welcome everyone to the session Governance, Management and Lifecycle in Microsoft Teams. My name is Thomas Binder. I'm a Senior Program Manager in the Teams product group. Before we dive into the content, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. You can find more readiness modules at ak.ms/teamsacademy. If you have any feedback, there are two types of feedback that we are really interested to hear. Any feedback for this particular session, what you want to learn, where we could expand, please go to ak.ms/teamscommunity, create a new post, and use the IT Pro training tag so that we can easily find it. If you have any feedback on how Teams behaves and what features you have, please go to ak.ms/teamsfeedback, and you can search there and vote on existing ideas, or you just add a new idea. Please also note that Teams and Office 365 evolves on a constant basis. We add new features and functionality. To stay up to date, please visit ak.ms/teamsblog for our latest blog articles. This slide also points out when the session was recorded last time. Here is what you should already know about Microsoft Teams and what you will learn in this session. You should already understand the value that Teams can bring to your company, and you should be familiar with the Teams user experience. We'll refer to a lot of features that we might not explain in detail, and so a good basic understanding of what Teams can do will help you to get out the most of this session. After the session, you will understand that IT pros can configure global and user-specific team settings, that as Teams is built on Office 365, Teams relies on some settings from other areas, such as Office 365 groups. And IT pros can automate the management of individual teams throughout the life cycle of these teams. Please also note that we are taking a couple of pieces out of scope and will not be talking in these, but we will have additional sessions that will go into these features. So we are not going to address here any calling scenarios, so no audio conferencing, phone system, and no call quality. Also, we are not going into upgrade from Skype for Business or into any client management. The session consists of the following areas. We are going to start with an introduction into managing Teams. Then we'll take a deep dive into the configuration of Teams. And at the end, we'll look at the day-to-day support of Lifecycle of Teams. Introduction to managing Teams. The term governance can mean a lot of different things to different people. In the context of this session, we are going to use this following definition of governance. First, it's about the streamlined deployment of products and technologies. In our case, Teams. We want to use governance to keep our organization systems secure and compliant. And we want to get sure that we get the best return on investment using this technology. If we look on how are we acting on the governance, we're seeing these three different areas. There are global settings, user-specific configurations, and then there's the Teams lifecycle. If we are thinking about, well, what is configuration, what is lifecycle, we look at it the following way. The configuration of Teams might be global settings that apply to your whole tenant, or it might be configuration that's only for specific users or groups of users. In general, this is considered as more static. Yes, you can change at any time, but usually you would define it once and change it only if your business requirements are changing. These settings, this configuration, is defined and configured only by an IT pro, by an administrator of your Teams environment. And then we have the life cycle of Teams. Please pay attention that Teams is written here lowercase as opposed to uppercase in the first headline, and that's intentionally. When we're using Teams, uppercase, then we're referring to the product teams. If we're using Teams lowercase, we're referring to individual teams that someone created in the Teams product. So the lifecycle of Teams is about these individual teams that users created or admins. And each individual team has its own lifecycle. At some point it's created, it's initiated, then it's used, that's the active phase, and most of the teams are closed at some point of time, that's the sunset phase. This configuration can be done by the IT pro or by the team owner, who could be just a regular user who created that team. As you have probably heard a couple of times in the past, Microsoft Teams runs on the Microsoft 365 infrastructure. So it uses different types of services that are there specifically for Teams, or maybe they were built for other services. We highly rely on the Skype infrastructure for our real-time communication. We use services built in Azure, and we are using the Office 365 platform and services such as SharePoint and Exchange. To the user, there's just the Teams client that interacts with all of these different services. However, for an administrator, it's important to have this background on there are different services that are being used because they affect how administrators can manage Microsoft Teams. From a management perspective, different areas that administrators need to manage. There is the Microsoft 365 and Azure AD admin tools that are used to manage groups, identity, licenses, and access. Then we do have our Teams and Skype for Business admin tools that are used for Teams specific features and communication related features. And finally, we have our security and compliance and admin tools, which are used to control, security and compliance settings across Microsoft 365, also affecting Microsoft Teams. You can see here also the link to aka.ms/teams/foundations, a training that goes into more detail on how Teams uses the Microsoft 365 infrastructure. When it comes to management tools, there are two groups of management tools. There are the graphical user interfaces and the command line and automation tools. The graphical user interfaces are all our admin centers: the Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business admin center, the Azure Active Directory admin center, the Office 365 security and compliance center. And all of them really easy to use, perfect if you want to create new policies, configure global settings, and do this kind of configuration. However, if you want to apply a policy to multiple users, you probably want to automate that somehow. And this is where the command line tools come in. PowerShell is really your best friend. You can do any configuration that you can do via the admin centers, and you can script that. So if you want to apply it to multiple users, easy to do. Also, if you want to automate something like onboarding process and provisioning for users, you can also do that with PowerShell. PowerShell has also limited lifecycle management, so you can create and delete teams, but you can't go much deeper. If you want to go much deeper on the lifecycle management, then you can use Graph API, and we're going to cover the details of PowerShell and Graph API at the end of the session when we're talking about the lifecycle management. Now, let's jump into the actual Teams configuration. Out of the box, Teams is designed with smart default settings. So we are expecting most customers, then they can just start Teams and don't need to change any of the settings. However, some companies might have different requirements, so they might go in and want to change one setting, enable or disable it, depending on their business requirements. Throughout this deck, we are going to highlight in which area of Office 365 a setting is configured. So if this is Teams, group-related setting, or a security and compliance-related setting. And we are going to call out if a setting is applied to the whole tenant as a global setting, if it's on a user-specific level, or if it's configured for specific groups. Please note that even if settings can be user-specific or specific to groups, there will be always a global default that will be used in case you don't apply user-specific settings. Throughout the session, we'll use the following scenario to see how different people, different companies configure their Teams environment. We have here on the very left side Bob, who works at the IT department of Woodgrove Bank. Being a bank, they have quite restrictive requirements on how to configure Teams. Carol in the middle, she works for Contoso. They are trying to find a balance between user freedom and IT control. And then we have Erin on the right, working for Adventure Works. They really just want to drive productivity and try to remove as much barriers as possible. Throughout the session, we will see how they are configuring Teams to meet their business goals. Role-based access control allows you in your Teams environment to give administrators different exposure to settings that they can configure within Teams. This is a Teams setting, and you can configure it per user. In that case, you would only configure it for your administrators. The roles are Team Service Administrator, who can manage all team services and all team settings, and can manage and create Office 365 groups. There's the Teams Communications Administrator, who can manage all calling and meeting features within Teams. And there are two support roles, the Support Engineer, who can troubleshoot communication issues using advanced tools, and then there's the Support Specialist, who can troubleshoot communication issues using basic tools. For more details, please go to aka.ms/teams-rback. The team settings are obviously a configuration in Teams, and they are global settings, so they will apply to the whole tenant. And they include features such as email integration, cloud storage options, and how meeting devices are operated. The considerations you want to make are, do I want my users to use third-party cloud storage providers, such as Google Drive or Box, or is this something that I want to prevent to have more control over where they store the data? Email integration can make it easier to transition collaboration to Teams and might be a good option to enable that as well. Is maybe scoped search something that's important to organization? If you want to change any of this configuration, you can do that with the Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center or with the Skype for Business PowerShell. More details are at aka.ms/teams-settings. Messaging policies are not a Teams feature, but this one is user specific. So there's a global policy that will be applied to all users and that you can change and manage, but then you can also create specific policies and assign them to specific users so that these users get only the specific policy. And that basically helps you to really create multiple policies and assign them to users to meet your business requirements. You can configure what people can do in chat and channel messages and enable features such as GIFs, stickers, editing messages, deleting messages. And in case you need to restrict or disable that for some or all your users, you can use this messaging policy. This is also configured in the Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center or with the Skype for Business PowerShell. For more information, go to aka.ms/teams-messaging. Let's take a look at the scenarios on how our different companies are configuring Teams and messaging. Bob is working for a bank, and as a regulated company, they are required to keep records of all activity in Teams. To make that easier, they are disabling email integration and third-party file storage providers. Additionally, to comply with their HR policies, they are disabling GIFs and stickers. Carol wants to encourage as much collaboration in Teams as possible, so email integration is enabled. However, they don't want to risk that any information is stored on third-party cloud storage, so they disable these options. Erin is super relaxed and they like to have fun while collaborating, so they are not disabling any of the features mentioned before. However, they are an international company and people like to communicate in different languages, so they enable the ability to translate messages directly from Teams. The meeting settings are again Teams settings. This is a global setting, so it is applied to all the meetings in your tenant. Here you can configure features like anonymous users joining Teams meetings. If you want to change that configuration, you need to go to the Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center or use the Skype for Business PowerShell. More information can be found at aka.ms/teams-meetings-settings. The meeting policies control which features are available when a user hosts a meeting. This is a Teams setting and it can be applied user-specific. So there's a global policy that will be applied to all users that don't have a dedicated policy, but you can assign them a policy if you need for some users different settings. You can create as many policies as you need to meet your business requirements. The features you can control include things like how can users schedule meetings and should they be able to use audio, video content sharing and or meeting recording. Please keep in mind that if you limit these features, it might reduce the user's ability to collaborate effectively. You can also control if users should be able to invite guest users or, if you have enabled in the meeting settings, if they should be allowed to invite anonymous users. Please also keep in mind that it's always the meeting policy of the person who organizes the meeting that will be effective, no matter what the meeting policy is of users that join the meeting. You can change the settings in the Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center and in the Skype for Business PowerShell. For details, please go to aka.ms/teams-meetings-policies. Let's see how our 3 customers are configuring their meetings environments. Bob requires all meeting participants to be identifiable, so they disable anonymous meeting join. Also, they disable recording and transcription services for certain users to comply with the company policy. Carol is worried about a subset of users who have very sensitive information, so they choose to not allow them to perform any screen sharing to get sure that they don't accidentally share information that they are not supposed to. Aaron, on the other hand, they see how video and content sharing drives their meeting culture. They regularly work with external participants, so they configure their policy in a way to make sure that all features are available to all users. Live event policies control how users can run live events in Teams. Live events are these webcasts for up to 10,000 participants. This is configured in Teams, and this is again a policy, which means you can assign policies to specific users or just use the global policy if you want the same setting for all of your users. The live event policies allow you to control what users can do within these live events. If you want to change any settings, go to the Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center or go to the Skype for Business PowerShell. For details, go to aka.ms/teams-live-events. External access, also known as federation, is the ability that your Teams users can communicate with Teams users in other tenants or Skype for Business users. This is a Teams settings and it's a global setting, so it will apply to all your users. Think here about if you have any business requirements that limit user communication with external participants. Maybe you don't want to allow it at all, maybe you want to limit it to certain domains. This is configured in the Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center and the Skype for Business PowerShell. For more information, go to aka.ms/teams-external-access. Guest access allows you to invite users without an account in your Azure Active Directory as guests to your teams, so they can be a member of a team and work in the channels and collaborate with your users. This is a group-based setting, so you need to configure that in the Office 365 group settings, and it can be applied either globally or only to certain groups. What you want to think about here is that this is a very powerful feature, as virtually anyone can be invited to work with in your teams. On the other side, that brings a certain risk because now content might be exposed to guest users and you want to get sure that that doesn't happen in the wrong way. You can use allow and deny lists to limit guests' access to specific domains. And as said before, you can limit guest access to specific teams. Also, there are audit logs available that will allow you to see who has invited which users. So if you have a breach of information, at least you can follow up. This is configured in the Office Admin Center or in the Azure Active Directory PowerShell. For details, go to aka.ms/guest-o365-groups. Let's take a look at our 3 sample customers, how they are using guest and external access. Bob's company need to be very selective on who they collaborate with. So they're using allow lists for guest and external access to limit collaboration to specific domains only. Carol wants to collaborate with external users. However, at the moment they are preventing guest users because they are still in the process of establishing their organizational collaborative culture in Teams. Eventually, when users better understand how Teams works, they plan to teach them on how to use guest access and what it means, and then they will enable it as well. Erin, as always, she just wants people to collaborate with each other. They don't put up any barriers, they allow guest access and external access without any limitations. The ability to create teams is bound to the ability to create Office 365 groups. If a user is not able to create an Office 365 group, they cannot create a team. This is a user-specific setting where you can configure per user if they should be able to create groups or not. However, what you want to think about is that Limiting the ability to create groups will affect negatively the productivity of users, as they cannot just go and create a team when they need one. Also, if only a subset of users can create teams, you need to create a process so that users can request teams to be created. Instead, we usually recommend to leverage user education to ensure that they have responsible team usage and understand when they should create a team and when they shouldn't. Also, you can audit who created a group in case someone misuses the power to create groups. Please note that this feature requires Azure AD Premium P1 license. This is configured in the Office Admin Center or via Azure Active Directory PowerShell. The details are at aka.ms/create-o365-groups. The naming of teams is also a setting that a lot of customers want to control. It is a group setting that is globally applied to all users, except for selected administrator roles that are exempted from these policies. We offer two different ways how you can control the naming of teams, which can be combined as well. You can use either a prefix-suffix naming convention that will add or append fixed strings or supported user attributes to the team name. You can also use the block words list to avoid intentional or unintentional misuse of teams. Please note that this as well requires Azure AD Premium P1 or Azure AD Basic EDU licenses. It is configured in the Office Admin Center or with the Azure Active Directory PowerShell. For all the details, go to aka.ms/naming-o365-groups. In order to apply specific settings to a subset of teams, you can leverage classification. This is a group-based setting and it will be applied to the whole tenant. If you enable classification, whenever a user creates a team, he will be asked to classify the team. For example, he could classify something as confidential. Then you can build scripts that run on a regular basis to look at all your teams and depending on what classification they have, change the settings. So you could have a script running that for all the teams classified as confidential, guest access is being disabled. Please note that this requires Azure AD Premium P1. This is configured in the Office Admin Center or via the Azure Active Directory PowerShell. For details, go to aka.ms/teams-classification. Let's take a look on how our sample customers controlling the creation of teams. For Bob, it's important that people understand which department a team creator belongs to. Therefore, he's implementing a prefix naming policy that will put the department name in front of every team name, representing the department the team owner belongs to. Carol wants to get sure that no one misuses teams and pretends, for example, to work for the HR department and creating an HR team and trick users into disclosing some information. So they are using a blocked word list where you put in HR so that no one can create a team that includes these words. Erin, they don't restrict names or who can create teams. If someone misbehaves, they use the audit logs to investigate. Please note that none of the groups or the customers decided to block the creation of teams for some users. They really want users to be as productive as possible, and they understand that only if users can create their own teams, they get out the maximum out of teams. Retention policies is a setting that can be used to define a range of days after all content will be deleted, or a range of days that content cannot be deleted, or both, depending on your business requirements. This is a setting configured in the security and compliance area. Please note that retention can be set independently for chat messages and channel messages. If you want to control channel messages, you can apply it globally or per team. Chat messages policies can be applied globally or per user. You also want to think about, if retention is a requirement for you, how you want to proceed with file retention, which is controlled in the SharePoint and OneDrive for Business settings. As said, you can control this with the Security and Compliance Center and the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center PowerShell. For details, go to aka.ms/teams-retention. Bob's company has a strict requirement to keep all data for 7 years. Therefore, they are using a retention policy that keeps all data for 7 years and deletes it afterwards. Both Carol and Erin don't have any requirements for retention policies, so they're not implementing any. Expiration policies. By default, teams exist until a team owner deletes the team. Retention policies will ask team owners to renew their teams on a regular basis. This helps you to limit the number of stale teams in your environment. This is a group setting that can be applied globally or to specific groups. It requires Azure AD Premium P1 for members of teams that have an expiration policy. If you configure an expiration policy, team owners will get a notification 30 days, 15 days, and 1 day before the team expires. Once a team is expired, users can still recover them for 30 days. They will get notifications per email and within the team's client. If you enable expiration policy, the default is 180 days. This can be configured in the Office Admin Center or via the Azure Active Directory PowerShell. For details, go to aka.ms/teams-expiration. Bob really wants to get sure that they don't have any stale teams. Therefore, they require owners to renew their teams every 90 days. Carol also thinks that expiration policies are a great idea so that there are not too many teams. They are using the default setting of 180 days. Erin doesn't use any expiration policies at all. If they see teams inactive for a long time, they just might manually remove them. Now that we have covered the configuration of teams, let's take a look at the day-to-day support lifecycle of teams. The lifecycle of a team consists of 3 phases: initiate, where a team is created; active, where users are using a team; and sunset, where a team is decommissioned. 2 areas affect this lifecycle of the team. The one is the configuration, these static setting and policies that we have discussed in the previous slides. Some of these policies influence how teams behave. So during the initiate phase, depending on who can create a team, depending on your configuration for naming convention, and depending on the classification policy, the experience on initiating a team will be different. During the active phase, we have the retention policy that will determine how long data will retain within a team. And then for sunsetting, we have the expiration policy that will remind people to renew their team, otherwise it will get removed. And then there's the management. The management can be done by an IT pro on behalf of the owner or by a team owner. During the initiate phase, this is creating a team or cloning a team, adding members and owners to teams, adding channels, adding apps, creating a team join link so that others can easily join that team. Basically everything that you need to do to get a team started. Then during the active time, you have a lot of the same actions: adding team members and owners, adding channels, adding apps, creating a team join link, but then also remove members, owners, and channels, post messages to teams, maybe removing apps. Finally, during the sunset phase, you can archive teams or even delete teams. So how can an IT pro support the management of a team's lifecycle? As said before, we have this initiate, active, sunset phases, which can be managed by the owner or an IT pro. There are a number of proactive IT pro activities. So you can jumpstart the creation of teams, including owners, members, channels, etc., so that you can just point your users at, hey, here's a new product, it's called Teams, and everything is ready, just go there and start using it. You can also sunset teams as required by the business. And then there are a number of reactive IT pro activities. So you can change team settings on behalf of owners, and you can add team owners for orphaned teams. So example would be someone created a team, it's a very important team, but then the person leaves the company and was the only team owner. Then the IT pro could go in and add another team owner so that this team can still be fully used. Here you can see a screenshot of the Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center, where we are showing the ability to manage teams. Please note that we haven't shipped this yet, but when we ship it, you will be able to look at your teams, see which teams are active, who are the members, what are the settings, and as an administrator, you will be able to change them as needed by your business. Please note, while you cannot use the UI at this point of time, you can use PowerShell and Graph API to achieve the same goals. Speaking of PowerShell and Graph API, what are these two things? How are they different and how are they the same? So PowerShell, as an IT pro, we expect you to be very familiar with PowerShell and know how to connect to Office 365 and change settings there. You can manage settings, configurations, and policies. So everything we talked about in the first part of this session, you can also control with PowerShell. But there's also a limited ability to manage actual teams. And we'll see at the next slide what you can actually do. For detailed information on Teams PowerShell, please go to aka.ms/teams-PowerShell. And then there's this Graph API. It's a REST-based API that allows you to access Teams and other Microsoft 365 settings. If you're not familiar with REST APIs, well, that tells you already this is a little bit more complex to implement. It's not difficult, but it's just a little bit more effort than getting PowerShell started and running some commands. If you want to learn more about Graph API, go to aka.ms/teams-graph. Graph is very powerful to manage actual teams, and we'll see that on the next slide. This slide has now all the details, which areas can be managed in PowerShell and which can be managed in Graph API. As you can see, Graph API can manage all the settings and PowerShell only a subset. Please take a moment to study and read what you can configure where. And now the summary. Now you've learned that IT pros can configure global and user-specific team settings. Since Teams is built in Office 365, it relies on some of the settings from other areas in Office 365. And IT pros can automate the management of individual teams throughout the lifecycle of these teams. Thank you for attending this session.